Isaiah stood at the bus station, his chest broad under a uniform heavy with medals. He expected a parade, or at least his mother's warm kitchen. Instead, he saw a woman on a rusted paint bucket. Her clothes were rags. Her eyes were milky and unmoving. She held a plastic cup with 3 pennies. It was Mama Ruby. Isaiah's hands hung heavy at his sides, his fingers curling into tight, white-knuckled fists. Then, a man in a designer suit stepped out of a luxury SUV, the very car Isaiah had paid for. The man didn't hug her. He kicked the cup out of Mama Ruby's, shaking hands, and laughed. "Not enough today, old woman. No dinner for you." Mama Ruby didn't scream. She whispered a name that made Isaiah's breath stop. "I'm sorry, Julian, please. Don't tell Isaiah I've failed him. Why is a billionaire's mother starving on the street? And why does she think her son is still 1,000 miles away?" Isaiah stood frozen, his shadow stretching long across the cracked pavement. To the world, he was Captain Isaiah Miller, a man of immense wealth and military honor. For years, he had been the invisible shield for his family. Every month, a wire transfer of $5,000 left his account. It was a fortune intended to wrap his mother, Mama Ruby, in the finest linens and keep her table overflowing. Before leaving for his final tour, Isaiah had seen his mother standing on the porch of their modest but clean suburban home. She had smiled, her eyes clear and bright, promising to wait for him. Julian, his younger cousin, stood beside her then. Julian had promised to manage the funds, to fix the roof, and to ensure Mama Ruby never lifted a finger. In his mind, Isaiah's return was supposed to be a scene of triumph. He imagined walking through a manicured garden, hearing the hum of a new air conditioner he'd paid for, and seeing his mother resting in a plush armchair. He expected to find Julian managing the family estate with the integrity Isaiah had funded. Everything was supposed to be perfect. But as the dust settled from the luxury SUV's departure, the reality felt like a physical blow. The stability Isaiah had built from thousands of miles away was nothing but a hollow shell. Julian was wearing a watch that cost more than a soldier's yearly salary, while Mama Ruby fumbled in the dirt for 3 measly pennies. Isaiah didn't move toward her yet. His tactical training kicked in, forcing him to observe. He noticed Mama Ruby wasn't just blind, she was terrified. She gripped her tattered shawl as if it were a shield. When a nearby street vendor moved a chair, she flinched violently. The question burned in Isaiah's throat. How could a woman whose bank account should be overflowing end up on a rusted paint bucket? Isaiah reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He opened the banking app. The records showed the money was still being withdrawn every single month at an ATM just 2 blocks from their house. If the money was being taken, why was she starving? Isaiah looked at his mother's hands. They were covered in small, systematic bruises, the kind that didn't come from a fall. He realized then that the peace he had been buying was actually a ransom. He took 1 step forward, but stopped when he saw Julian's SUV pull over again at the corner. Julian wasn't leaving. He was waiting for someone else. Isaiah pulled back into the shadows of a brick pillar. He watched Julian's SUV idle at the curb. The engine hummed with a quiet, expensive power. Julian didn't get out. Instead, a woman Isaiah didn't recognize approached the car. She was dressed in a sharp business suit, carrying a leather briefcase. She leaned into the window, whispered something to Julian, and handed him a thick yellow envelope. Julian didn't look at the envelope. He tossed it onto the passenger seat and pointed toward the bus station, toward Mama Ruby's. The woman nodded, checked her watch, and walked away quickly. Isaiah's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a family dispute. This looked like a transaction. He waited until the SUV finally roared away before stepping toward his mother. He didn't call out her name. He wanted to hear what she heard. He walked softly, stopping just 3 feet away. Mama Ruby was muttering something under her breath. It wasn't a prayer. She was counting. 32. 33, she whispered, her fingers tracing the rim of the plastic cup. A shadow fell over her. Mama Ruby stiffened. Her head tilted, her sightless eyes searching the air. She didn't smile. She pulled the rusted bucket closer to her body. "I've already given it to him," she said, her voice a dry crackle. "Please. Tell the landlord I'll have the rest by tonight. Just don't hurt the boy." Isaiah felt a sharp pain in his chest. Landlord. He owned the house. There was no landlord. And who was the boy? Isaiah was her only son. He was 34 years old and standing right in front of her. He reached out a hand, intending to touch her shoulder, but stopped when he saw something tucked into the waistband of her tattered skirt. It was a small, laminated photo. He leaned in closer. It was a picture of him in his desert fatigues, but the edges were charred, as if someone had tried to burn it. Suddenly, a loud whistle pierced the air. A group of 3 young men in hooded sweatshirts emerged from around the corner. They weren't looking for a bus. They were looking at Mama Ruby's. One of them held a heavy wooden stick, tapping it rhythmically against his palm. Mama Ruby stood up so fast she nearly tipped the bucket. She didn't run. She walked toward them with her hands out, like a person walking into a storm. "I'm here," she called out. "I'm here. Is he safe?" The leader of the group smiled, revealing a gold tooth. He didn't answer her. He looked past her, his eyes locking onto Isaiah's military boots. The young man with the gold tooth stopped tapping his stick. He looked at Isaiah's polished boots, then up at his crisp military uniform. For a second, the street went silent. The contrast was sickening. Isaiah stood there, a symbol of national strength and billion-dollar success. 5 feet away, his mother stood trembling, her blind eyes wide with terror, offering herself up to protect a secret. "Who are you, soldier boy?" the leader sneered, though he took a half step back. "This stop is private property. Move along." Isaiah didn't blink. He looked at the leader's wrist. There it was, a heavy gold watch. It was a limited edition model, the exact same one Isaiah had sent to Julian for his birthday last year. The watch glittered in the sun, a trophy of stolen wealth, while Mama Ruby's fingernails were caked with the grime of the bus station floor. "I'm just a traveler," Isaiah said, his voice low and dangerous. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a roll of $100 bills. The eyes of the 3 men lit up like predators. Mama Ruby gasped, reaching out blindly toward the sound of his voice. "No, please sir, just go. They don't want trouble. They just want what's owed." Isaiah looked at the leader. "What is owed? And who is the boy she's talking about?" The leader laughed, stepping closer to Mama Ruby and grabbing her arm roughly. "The boy. He's the reason this old lady works so hard. You want to pay her debt, soldier. It's a big number. Bigger than your paycheck." Isaiah's jaw tightened. He saw Julian's SUV circle back around the block, watching from a distance. Julian wasn't coming to help. He was supervising. "I have the monies," Isaiah said, holding up the cash. "But I want to see the boy first. I don't pay for ghosts." The men looked at each other confused. The leader leaned into Mama Ruby's ear. "Tell him, Ruby. Tell him what happens if the money stops." Mama Ruby started to sob, her hands shaking so hard the plastic cup fell and shattered. "He's in the basement," she choked out. "The little ones. He hasn't had his medicine in 2 days. Please, just give them the money." Isaiah's heart hammered against his ribs. A boy. In a basement. He had been gone for 3 years. He had no siblings, no nephews. He threw a single $100 bill on the ground. As the thugs scrambled for it, Isaiah leaned in and whispered into his mother's ear, using the secret nickname only the 2 of them knew. "Little bird, I'm home." Mama Ruby froze. Her breath hitched. But before she could speak, the leader grabbed Isaiah's shoulder. "Hey, we said the whole roll, or the boy gets nothing." Isaiah looked at the hand on his shoulder. Then he looked at the SUV across the street. Julian was smiling. He was holding up a cell phone, showing a live video feed of a dark, cramped room. Isaiah realized then that he wasn't just dealing with a thief. He was dealing with a kidnapper who was using a child to turn his mother into a slave. But whose child was it? The leader's hand tightened on Isaiah's shoulder, his fingers digging into the fabric of the uniform. Isaiah didn't flinch. His eyes were locked on the phone screen across the street. In that grainy, dark video feed, he saw a small boy huddled on a thin mattress. The boy looked about 4 years old. He was clutching a ragged teddy bear, the same one Isaiah had bought for his mother to give to a neighbor's child years ago. The whole role soldier, now, the leader barked. Isaiah didn't reach for the money. Instead, he grabbed the leader's wrist with lightning speed. He twisted it just enough to make the man hiss in pain. With his other hand, Isaiah gently caught Mama Ruby as she began to collapse. "I told you," Isaiah whispered, his voice vibrating with a cold fury. "I don't pay for ghosts. And I don't pay men who work for cowards in SUVs." The leader's eyes went wide. He tried to pull away, but Isaiah was like a mountain. Across the street, the SUV's tires screeched. Julian realized the situation was changing. He sped off, disappearing around the corner. Mama Ruby's hands flew to Isaiah's face. Her fingers were rough, trembling as they traced his jaw, his nose, and the scar on his forehead. "Isaiah," she breathed, her voice so thin it nearly broke. "No. Julian told me you were gone. He showed me the letter. The official letter." "I'm here, Mama," Isaiah said, his voice finally cracking. But there was no celebration. Mama Ruby didn't hug him back. Instead, she pushed him away with surprising force. Her face was masked in pure horror. "You have to run," she screamed, her sightless eyes darting wildly. "If they see you here, they'll hurt him. They told me if I ever spoke your name to a stranger, the boy would never wake up." Isaiah caught her hands. "Mama, look at me. Who is that boy? Why is Julian doing this?" Mama Ruby leaned in, her lips brushing Isaiah's ear. She was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. "He's yours, Isaiah," she whispered. "He's your son. Julian didn't just take the house. He took the child you never knew you had." Isaiah felt the world tilt. A son. He had left behind a life, but he never knew there was a life waiting to be born. But before he could ask another question, the leader's phone rang. The man answered it shaking. He put it on speaker. Julian's voice came through, cold and distorted. "Since you like surprises, Isaiah, check the bag your mother is holding. You have 30 seconds. Isaiah looked down. Tucked inside his mother's ragged shawl was a small, ticking black box. "Justice is about to be served. Please like and subscribe to the channel to support us. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, New York, London, or perhaps South Africa. We want to know." Isaiah's heart skipped a beat as the rhythmic ticking filled the air. He reached into his mother's shawl and pulled out the small black box. His military training screamed at him to throw it, but his eyes caught a screen on the device. It wasn't a bomb. It was a digital tracker with a built-in speaker and a red flashing light. 20 seconds, Isaiah. Julian's voice crackled through the box. "If that light goes solid green, the door to the basement locks forever. No air. No way out for the boys." Isaiah didn't wait. He didn't scream or beg. He grabbed Mama Ruby's hand and pulled her toward the brick pillar. His mind was a storm of fire, a son. He had a son, and Julian was using him like a pawn in a sick game. "Mama, we have to move." Now Isaiah shouted. "No, they'll kill him," Mama Ruby wailed, her sightless eyes streaming with tears. She tried to pull back, her feet dragging against the gravel. Julian said if I ever left this spot before sunset, it would be the end. Isaiah looked at the leader with the gold tooth. The man was backing away, clutching his bruised wrist, but his eyes were darting toward a black sedan, idling 50 yards away. The sedan's windows were tinted pitch black. Isaiah didn't have 30 seconds. He had 0. He scooped Mama Ruby up in his arms. Ignoring her protests, he ran, not toward the sedan, but toward a parked motorcycle he had left near the station entrance. Isaiah, stop, Julian's voice hissed from the box. You think your billions can save a child you've never met. You don't even know his name. You don't know who his mother is. Isaiah skidded to a halt beside the motorcycle. He looked at the black box. The ticking was getting faster. The red light was flickering, almost solid. I know enough. Isaiah growled into the speaker. I know you're a dead man, Julian. He smashed the box against the pavement and crushed it under his boot. Silence followed, a heavy, terrifying silence. Mama Ruby gasped, clutching Isaiah's neck. What did you do? You killed him. You killed the boy. Isaiah didn't answer. He looked at the black sedan. The doors opened slowly. 2 men stepped out, but they weren't carrying weapons. They were carrying a small, blue pair of sneakers soaked in water. Who was the woman Julian was meeting earlier? And why did the sneakers look exactly like the ones Isaiah had sent in a care package a year ago? Isaiah stared at the soaked blue sneakers in the men's hands. His breath hitched. Those shoes didn't belong in a puddle. They belonged on the feet of the son he had just discovered existed. The 2 men didn't attack. Instead, they tossed the wet shoes onto the pavement between Isaiah and the black sedan. Look at the big hero, one of the men shouted, his voice drawing the attention of the gathering crowd at the bus station. Coming back in a fancy uniform while his mother begs for bread. And now he's attacking the people who actually looked after her. Commuters began to stop. Phones were pulled out. The click of cameras filled the air. Isaiah felt the heavy weight of 100 judging eyes. To the crowd, he wasn't a billionaire or a decorated captain. He was a wealthy man in a clean suit standing over a blind, sobbing woman in rags. He's a monster, a woman from the crowd yelled. Look at her. She's terrified of him. Mama Ruby was still on her knees, her hands frantically searching the ground for the shattered pieces of the black box. The boy, as she moaned, her voice catching the attention of the onlookers. He broke the box. Julian said the boy would die if the box broke. A tall, older woman pushed through the crowd. It was Mrs. Gable, the neighbor Isaiah remembered from his childhood. But she didn't greet him with a smile. She looked at Isaiah with pure disgust. Isaiah Miller. Is that really you? She spat. We heard you were dead. Then we heard you were a big shot in the city. But while you were buying skyscrapers, Julian was the only one here. He told us you sent a letter saying you never wanted to see this old burden again. That's a lie, Mrs. Gable, Isaiah said, his voice straining to stay calm. I sent money. Every month. $5,000. The crowd erupted in mocking laughter. The man with the gold tooth stepped forward, emboldened by the mob. 5,000. Your mother lived on nickels in a cup. Julian had to sell his own car just to pay for her eye drops. You're a liar and a disgrace to that uniform. Isaiah reached for his phone to show the bank records, but a hand grabbed his wrist. It was he woman in the sharp business suit stepped forward, the same one who had handed Julian the envelope earlier. She wasn't a business partner, she was a predator in professional clothing. She held up a legal document for the crowd to see. I'm a social worker, she lied smoothly. And this man is a stranger to this woman. We have a restraining order signed by her legal guardian, Julian Miller. Isaiah, you need to step away from the victim. Victim. The word stung like a lash. Isaiah looked at his mother. She was being pulled away by the 2 men from the sedan. But as they lifted her, Mama Ruby dropped something, a small, brass key with a red ribbon tied to it. She didn't drop it by accident. She kicked it toward Isaiah's boot. Go to the garden, she whispered so softly only he could hear. Under the stones where the lilies died. Why would a blind woman hide a key under dead flowers? And if Julian was the guardian, why was he so afraid of what was under those stones? Isaiah slid his foot over the brass key, hiding it beneath the sole of his boot, as the men forced Mama Ruby into the back of the black sedan. The crowd cheered as the car sped away. They thought they had saved a helpless woman from a cold-hearted son. Isaiah stood alone, his medals feeling like light weights on his chest. Mrs. Gable stepped closer, her face twisted in a sneer. "Don't bother going to the house, Isaiah. Julian changed the locks months ago. He said you sold the place to a developer to fund your tech company. He's been paying rent to keep your mother in that garage out of the kindness of his heart." Isaiah felt a surge of white-hot anger. He had never signed a sale deed. He had never even spoken to a developer. But then he remembered the yellow envelope the woman had handed Julian earlier. It was thick, heavy, and bore the seal of a local notary. Julian wouldn't do that, Isaiah muttered. But even as he said it, his mind began to spin a darker thread. He remembered the monthly banking alerts. The withdrawals were always made at 3:00 a.m. Julian had told him Mama Ruby suffered from insomnia and liked to go to the 24-hour market. Isaiah had believed him. Now, he realized Julian wasn't just stealing. He was building a paper trail to make Isaiah look like the villain. Isaiah turned and walked away from the shouting crowd, heading toward the old neighborhood. He arrived at the gates of his mother's home. The roses he had planted were gone. The windows were boarded up with cheap plywood. He ignored the no trespassing sign and moved toward the backyard. The garden was a graveyard of gray stalks and dry dirt. He found the patch where the lilies used to grow, the spot Mama Ruby mentioned. Isaiah knelt, digging into the hard earth with his bare hands. His fingernails bled as he clawed through the soil. His fingers hit something hard, a small, wooden cigar box wrapped in heavy plastic. Inside wasn't money. It was a stack of letters. Every single one was addressed to Isaiah, but none of them had stamps. They were never mailed. He opened the top one. The handwriting was shaky. Written before her sight had completely failed. "Isaiah, help me." The letter began. "Julian says you're the one who sent the men to take the baby. He says if I don't beg, you'll stop paying for his heart surgery." Isaiah's hands shook. Heart surgery. He looked at the bottom of the box. There was a medical bracelet for a child. The name on the tag wasn't Miller. It was a name he hadn't heard in 5 years. Suddenly, the porch light of the house flickered on. A shadow moved behind the plywood. It wasn't Julian. It was a woman's silhouette, and she was holding a telephone to her ear. "He's here," she whispered into the phone. "He found the box. Send the police." Isaiah dropped the letters. The medical bracelet felt cold against his palm. The name on it was Marcus Vance. He remembered Sarah Vance, the woman he had loved before the military. He remembered the night he left, the tears in her eyes, and the secret she almost told him. Julian hadn't just stolen money. He had stolen 5 years of a child's life. The silhouette behind the plywood moved. Isaiah didn't wait for the police. He didn't wait for an explanation. His tactical training vanished, replaced by a raw, primal rage. He lunged toward the back door, his shoulder slamming into the rotted wood. The door splintered. Isaiah burst into the kitchen, but it wasn't the home he remembered. It was filled with high-end electronics, expensive champagne bottles, and Julian's designer clothes. The woman with the phone screamed, dropping the device. It was the woman from the station, the one posing as a social worker. Her mask was finally slipping. "Where is he?" Isaiah roared. "I don't know what you're talking about," she shrieked, backing into a corner. Isaiah grabbed a heavy marble vase, a gift he had sent Mama Ruby from overseas, and smashed it onto the granite counter. "The boy, Marcus. Where is he?" He didn't see Julian enter from the hallway. Julian wasn't afraid. He was holding a remote control and a small, leather-bound notebook. "You're too late, Isaiah," Julian said, his voice smooth and mocking. "The police are 2 minutes away. And as for the boy, Sarah was more than happy to give him up once I told her you were the one who funded her accident. Isaiah's vision blurred with red. Accident. He didn't think. He didn't analyze the logic. He saw the man who had turned his mother into a beggar and his son into a prisoner. Isaiah stepped forward and gripped Julian by the throat, pinning him against the wall. "I will kill you," Isaiah hissed, his fingers tightening. "Go ahead," Julian wheezed, pointing the remote at a small camera in the corner. "The whole neighborhood is watching. You're the billionaire soldier who came home to assault his own family. You're the villain they want you to be." Suddenly, the sound of a child's muffled cry echoed through the floorboards. It didn't come from the basement. It came from inside the heavy, industrial-sized freezer in the pantry. The light on the freezer was red. It was locked from the outside with a digital keypad. Julian smiled through his bruises. "Only I have the code, Isaiah. And I just changed it." Isaiah's hands dropped from Julian's throat. He lunged toward the industrial freezer in the pantry, his heart hammering against his ribs. The red light on the digital keypad glared at him like a mocking eye. He pulled at the heavy steel handle, but it didn't budge. It was a vacuum-sealed unit. Inside, the muffled crying had stopped, replaced by a rhythmic, weak thumping. "Open it," Isaiah screamed, spinning back toward Julian. Julian leaned against the wall, wiping blood from his lip. He held up the remote. "I told you. I changed the code. Every wrong guess cuts the oxygen circulation. You have one try, cousin, one." Blue and red lights began to flash against the kitchen walls. The sirens were loud now, pulling into the driveway. Julian's smile widened. He tossed the remote into the sink filled with water, watching the electronics short-circuit and die. "Police!" Hands in the air, a voice boomed from the shattered back door. Isaiah didn't move toward the officers. He stayed pressed against the freezer door. "My son is in here. He can't breathe. Open this door." But the officers didn't see a father. They saw a man who had broken into a home, smashed a vase, and bloodied a homeowner. Mrs. Gable stood behind the police, pointing a trembling finger. "That's him. He's the one who's been threatening us. He's trying to steal Julian's property." The social worker sobbed loudly, pointing at the smashed marble on the floor. "He's insane. He tried to kill us." Two officers tackled Isaiah, forcing him away from the pantry. His face was pressed into the cold tile. He watched the freezer, his eyes burning. The red light on the keypad suddenly turned into a steady, pulsing purple. "No," Isaiah choked out. "Not purple. Anything but purple." Julian knelt down next to Isaiah's head while the police cuffed him. He whispered so low the officers couldn't hear. "Sarah didn't give him up for money, Isaiah. She gave him up because she saw the video of you ordering the strike on her father's warehouse. I wonder, who sent her that video?" Isaiah stopped struggling. His body went limp. Julian had spent years crafting a monster, and Isaiah had just walked right into the cage. As they dragged Isaiah toward the door, he saw Mama Ruby being led into the house by a different officer. She was holding a small, wet rag to her sightless eyes. "Isaiah," she called out, her voice trembling. "Did you find the boy? Is Marcus okay?" Julian stepped forward and took her arm. "He's fine, Auntie. Isaiah is just leaving." He decided he didn't want the responsibility after all. Mama Ruby froze. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a single, crumpled piece of paper she had been hiding. "But Julian, the doctor just called. They said the heart donor was canceled. They said the money didn't go through." Julian's face went pale. He looked at the freezer. The purple light began to flash faster. If Julian had the money, why was the surgery canceled? And what was really happening behind that steel door? Julian's confident smirk vanished. He stared at Mama Ruby, his eyes darting toward the freezer. The purple light was no longer just flashing, it was screaming in a high-pitched electronic tone. Julian reached for his pocket, searching for a second device. but his hands were shaking too hard. "What do you mean the money didn't go through?" Julian hissed at the blind woman. "I transferred it this morning." Mama Ruby didn't look at him. She looked toward the sound of Isaiah's heavy breathing on the floor. "The bank said the account was frozen, Julian. They said the owner flagged it for identity theft 2 hours ago." Isaiah's head snapped up. He hadn't frozen the account. He hadn't had time. The police officers hesitated, their grip on Isaiah loosening. One officer walked toward the freezer, sniffing the air. "Is that smoke?" "The code," Isaiah yelled, his voice echoing off the kitchen tiles. "Julian, if the surgery is canceled, that boy doesn't have a donor. And if you don't open that door, he doesn't have air. Is this what you wanted?" Julian looked at the police, then at the freezer. The pressure was breaking him. He scrambled toward the keypad, his fingers flying over the buttons. 1994, he whispered. The keypad beeped red. "Access denied." "You said you changed it," Isaiah screamed. "I did," Julian cried, his voice breaking into a sob. "I changed it to the date Isaiah left for the service. It's not working." Suddenly, the social worker woman backed toward the door, her face pale. She tried to slip away, but Mrs. Gable blocked her path. The older neighbor wasn't looking at Isaiah anymore. She was looking at the woman's designer bag. "That's Mama Ruby's medical file," Mrs. Gable said, her voice cold. "Why is it in your bag? And why is there a notary stamp with Sarah Vance's name on it?" The woman froze. Isaiah watched as the truth began to unravel like a rotted thread. Julian hadn't been the mastermind. He had been a tool. Isaiah looked at the freezer keypad one last time. He saw a small, faint smudge of blue ink on the number 7, a color Julian hadn't touched. Isaiah lunged forward, escaping the officer's grasp. He didn't punch Julian. He slammed his fist into the number 7. The freezer door hissed. The vacuum seal broke. But as the door swung open, the room didn't fill with the sound of a crying child. It was silent. Isaiah reached into the frost and pulled out a small, weighted jacket and a tape recorder. The boy wasn't in the freezer. Julian fell to his knees, staring at the empty metal box. Then, "Where is he? I put him there. I locked him in myself." A soft chime came from Mama Ruby's pocket. It was a cell phone, a smartphone she wasn't supposed to know how to use. "He's safe, Isaiah," Mama Ruby said, her voice suddenly steady and clear. She stood up straight, her gaze no longer drifting, but locking onto Julian with a clarity that terrified him. "He's been safe since the moment you landed." If Mama Ruby wasn't blind, how much of this nightmare had she planned herself? And who was really standing at the bus station that morning? Isaiah crawled toward his mother's feet, his hands trembling as he reached for the hem of her ragged skirt. The police stood back, lowering their weapons. The kitchen was silent, except for the faint mechanical whir of the empty freezer. Isaiah looked up at Mama Ruby. Her eyes were clear, focused, and filled with a sorrow that hit him harder than any battlefield wound. "Mama," he choked out. I thought I was protecting you. I sent the money. I thought that was enough." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his military dog tags, pressing them into her palm. It was a gesture of total surrender. He realized now that his billions were just paper. They hadn't bought her safety, they had bought her a prison. Mama Ruby touched his hair, her fingers finally gentle. "Money doesn't have eyes, Isaiah. It couldn't see that Julian was replacing your love with fear. It couldn't see that he was using a child's heartbeat to keep me on that street corner." Isaiah looked down at Julian, who remained a broken heap on the kitchen floor. The rage was gone, replaced by a hollow, sickening regret. He had let his ego and his distance blind him to the truth. "I'm sorry," Isaiah whispered, his voice breaking. "I should have come home years ago. I should have been the one holding your hand, not sending a check." He stood up and faced the officers. He didn't fight when they began to remove the handcuffs. Instead, he pointed to the social worker and Julian. "I want to confess," Isaiah said clearly. "I want to confess to the negligence that allowed this to happen, but first, you need to take them." The yellow envelope in the bag. The notary fraud. It's all there. Mrs. Gable stepped forward, holding the tape recorder Isaiah had found in the freezer. She pressed play. Julian's voice filled the room, detailing exactly how he had faked the boys' kidnapping to keep the money flowing. Isaiah turned back to his mother. "Where is he, Mama? Where is Marcus?" Mama Ruby didn't answer with words. She walked to the boarded-up window and pulled back a single plank of plywood. She pointed toward the small shed at the very back of the property, the one Isaiah used to build birdhouses in as a boy. The door to the shed opened. A woman stepped out, clutching a small boy's hand. Isaiah's heart stopped. It was Sarah, but she wasn't running toward him. She was holding a heavy manila folder, and her face was set in stone. "The boy is safe," Sarah called out across the yard, but Isaiah, "the money you sent didn't go to Julian. Look at the signature on the back of the house deed." Isaiah took the folder Sarah threw toward him. He opened it and froze. The signature wasn't Julian's. It wasn't the social worker's. It was his own father's signature. The man Isaiah had buried 10 years ago. Isaiah stared at the ink on the paper. It was a sharp, aggressive slant. It was undeniably his father's signature. But his father had been dead for a decade. He looked from the deed to Mama Ruby, then to Sarah, who stood protectively in front of the little boy. "How is this possible?" Isaiah whispered. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes cold. "Julian didn't work alone, Isaiah. He couldn't have. He needed a ghost. He needed someone the bank would never question." Isaiah didn't wait for her to finish. He turned to the lead police officer. "Keep them here. Don't let Julian or that woman leave this kitchen." Isaiah ran toward the backyard shed. He didn't go to hug the boy yet. He went to the very back of the shed, where a heavy iron floor safe was bolted into the concrete. He used the brass key Mama Ruby had kicked to him at the bus station. The lock clicked. Inside was a secondary ledger and a burner phone that was still vibrating. Isaiah picked it up. A message flashed on the screen. "Is the soldier handled? The buyer is waiting at the docks." The buyer. Isaiah realized the house wasn't just being stolen. It was being used as a waypoint for something much darker. He looked at the child Marcus, who was now hiding behind Sarah's skirt. The boy's eyes were the exact same shade of amber as Isaiah's. "Sarah, get in the car. Mrs. Gable, take my mother to the precinct," Isaiah commanded. His voice was no longer that of a grieving son, but a commander on the battlefield. He grabbed Julian by the collar and dragged him toward the driveway. "You're going to tell me who is on the other end of this phone, or I'll make sure the police are the least of your worries." Julian's face was a mask of terror. "I can't tell you. If I speak his name, we all die. He's not a ghost, Isaiah. He never was." As Isaiah forced Julian into the back of his vehicle, a black SUV with government plates pulled up slowly at the end of the street. It wasn't the police. Isaiah saw the driver lower the window. The man was wearing a military ring, the same one given only to Isaiah's elite unit. The man didn't point a gun. He held up a small, silver locket. It was the locket Isaiah had placed in his father's casket 10 years ago. "The boy is coming with us, Captain," the driver said. Who was really in that casket 10 years ago? And why was Isaiah's own unit coming for his son? Isaiah stared at the silver locket. His heart felt like it had been pierced by a bayonet. He didn't hand over the boy. Instead, he stepped between the SUV and his family, his hand resting on his service pistol. "My father is dead," Isaiah said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I buried him with my own hands." The driver stepped out of the SUV. He didn't attack. He stood at attention and saluted. "The casket was empty, Captain. It was a tactical extraction. Your father didn't die 10 years ago. He was recruited for a deep cover operation, the same one Julian was accidentally laundering money for. Isaiah felt the world shift again. The betrayal, the begging on the street, the blindness, it was all a complex web designed to hide Marcus, the child whose blood carried the key to a legacy Isaiah never knew existed. Mama Ruby walked toward the SUV. She didn't look like a beggar anymore. She reached out and touched the driver's hand. "It's time, isn't it?" she asked softly. "Yes, ma'am," the driver replied. "The extraction is complete. Julian isn't just a thief, Isaiah. He's been laundering money for a criminal syndicate. Federal units are moving in on him right now." Julian was dragged away in handcuffs, his screams for mercy ignored by everyone. He would spend the rest of his life in a place where designer watches didn't exist. Isaiah turned to Sarah. She was crying, but she finally let go of Marcus's hand. The little boy ran to Isaiah. He didn't know about the billions or the wars. He just saw a man who looked like the hero in the charred photo he had kept under his pillow. Isaiah picked up his son, holding him so tight he could feel the boy's steady heartbeat. He looked at Mama Ruby's, whose eyes were now shining with a different kind of moisture. "We're going home, Mamas," Isaiah whispered. "The real home." He looked back at the empty driveway. The SUV had vanished. All that remained was the silver locket on the pavement. Isaiah picked it up and opened it. Inside wasn't a picture of his father. It was a fresh, handwritten note: "Watch over the boy, Captain. I'll see you at the final gate." Isaiah looked at the horizon. The sun was setting, but for the first time in 10 years, he wasn't afraid of the dark. What was the final gate? And who was really watching them from the shadows of the next street? Thank you for staying with us until the end of this incredible journey. If this story touched you, please subscribe and leave a comment. We'll see you in the next one.